What would I say if I told you the horrors, the horror of Hollywood? Now, I was a kid influenced by, MTV, from a small town. I was a kid from a small town. Colonial Williamsburg is a small town. Even the freeways in and out of there, they're like 2 lanes on each side. But, watching MTV, watching, movies, seeing, Van Halen videos, all of that inspired me. Plus, the guitar. Let's not forget the guitar. The guitar was it's still a relatively new instrument. The electric guitar is a relatively new instrument. And, it really came to prominence in the 1950s. Now, I think in the 30s, Charlie Christian put a pickup on his guitar, and, maybe the 40s, they might have, had some things like that. But it wasn't until the 50s that the Les Paul and the Stratocaster and the Telecaster, Gretsch, those things really came to prominence. So that's just, a decade prior to when I was born in 1966, okay? So, wanting to play guitar, one, because here's the thing. Guitar is an instrument, being so new, have we really watched, and I've watched in my lifetime, the evolution of guitar, whether it's 50s with Chuck Berry, through the 60s with the psychedelic and the Jimi Hendrix, and then the late 70s when Eddie Van Halen came up, and all through that, and now to these modern players where they jump all over the neck and throw in random harmonics, and the style that seems to purvey on the Instagrams and the TikToks and stuff like that. Some of them are speeding up their clips, and some of them might not be, but you be the judge of that. But trying to learn guitar and learn what, Eddie Van Halen was doing, and learn, what Joe Pass was doing, and learn what George Benson was doing, and trying to learn it was a challenge, being in a small town. Now, I had some good teachers, and they taught me as much as they could, but it got to a point where I needed to go somewhere else. And the first place I went was Berkeley in Boston, and I did a summer session there, and I'm gonna have to do a whole video about that. That was a whole other experience. But being from a small town and seeing all the hair bands, and every one of them had guitars, these guitar solos. In the late 80s, even the R&B songs, the tempo, funky songs, would have guitar solos, whether it was Beat It or Shalimar or Cameo with the song Candy, who had a guy on there that eventually became a Nashville session player. But I digress. Trying to learn it, and trying to learn these modern techniques and jazz techniques and all that stuff, as it's, translates to the guitar, was a very difficult thing. And, Hollywood and Los Angeles had the Musicians Institute, right? And most specifically, it was called G.I.T, Guitar Institute of Technology. Now, they assembled some of the best players on the West Coast. And I'll argue that collection of players that they initially had when I went in 1988, 89. They may be some of the greatest guitar players of all time. Guys like Joe DiOrio, guys like Don Mock, teachers like Les Wise, Scott Henderson, Frank Gambale, Paul Gilbert. That is an incredible array of guitarists. And to be able to go and learn from those, plus guys like Alan Hines and Dan Gill. Now there was two Dan Gills, Dan Gilbert. I don't remember I don't remember everybody, but man, and then I had a guy named Richard Smith, who was my private instructor there, and he was a great, like, pop fusion, player, graduated from USC. So these were guys at the top, and in order to learn guitar correctly at that point in time, because we didn't have YouTube, you had to go to the source, and the source at that time was G.I.T. So, being in Virginia and, having limited resources and starting playing professionally at Busch Gardens, I could already figure out, guitar parts on songs on the radio. So, I decided, after playing at Busch Gardens and going to college for 2 years, and, the experience of learning guitar at the first year, I went to Shenandoah Conservatory, right? Now, Shenandoah Conservatory is in Virginia, and it was a music school, and they did have a jazz guitar teacher, so I was mainly focused on getting a business degree, but I took, guitar courses on the side. So I took Jazz Improv 101, and I took jazz guitar studies, in addition to the, history and, all the other stuff that you have to take in college. And I did learn from the jazz school there. I did have a pretty good jazz teacher, and he got me to learn a straight ahead Johnny Smith playing the song Michelle, the guitar solo on that. And that was a good gift. And the jazz improv class, I always learned a lot in those classes, because they would force you to play over these tunes. You have to figure out how to improvise over these songs. But as far as direct, the modern techniques that guitar players were doing at the time, sweep picking and tapping and, chromaticism and all these, chord melody and all this stuff, man, G.I.T. was the place. It was the place. But I'm just a kid from a small town. I'd spent a few months in Boston, going to Berkeley, and man, that was a wake up, because that's a big city, man. Boston is pretty crazy. But I decided, after playing at Busch Gardens, and then a couple years of college, and then playing in a top 40 cover band out in O'Sullivan's on the Wharf out there. I can't remember the area, but it's near Virginia Beach. And after doing that, I decided I wanted to go to California. And really, the way for me to do that and kind of learn and get my feet wet at the same time was say, hey, Mom, I want to go to this. I want to go back to school. And I want to go to this guitar school out in California. I think I can really learn a lot. So, my mother, helping me as much as she can, she said, okay, as long as you go back to school, I'll help you. Okay. So we go out to Hollywood. My dad drives me out there, and he stays with me for a while, gets me set up, puts some food in the pantry and all that. I'm in a really, really sketchy apartment in Hollywood, and as a matter of fact, it's another story, but a famous guitar player had been found dead in the pool in the building that I lived in. Yeah. So, anyway, I'm in Hollywood. I don't know this at the time. I didn't learn this till many years later that someone had been found dead, famous guitar player, in that pool. That's another story. These videos could go on and on and on and on. But all of a sudden I'm in Hollywood, and I had to walk from near La Brea was where my apartment was. And I had to walk all the way down Hollywood Boulevard, get to G.I.T, which was in a building just off of Hollywood. They actually at the time had two buildings. They had one on Hollywood Boulevard that you would go in, and they had rooms up there. And then they had their new building off to the right, off of Hollywood Boulevard. So every day I would have to put my guitar in my gig bag and walk down Hollywood Boulevard. And I knew, from my time in Boston, that I needed to walk with purpose. I needed to act like I knew where I was going, and of course I did. I needed to not stop and talk to anyone. If anyone said, hey man, that's the number one rule in a city. If anybody starts coming, hey man, starts trying to ask you a question, they're not trying to help you, okay? But the horrors that I would see every day, and the choking on the smog from the buses, and the kids, Los Angeles, I feel, is a completely different world than it was back then. You gotta understand, this was the era of crack. This was the era, a lot of H on the street, a lot of SPEED on the street, and the AIDS crisis. And the amount of kids that were on Hollywood Boulevard that were homeless, having to hustle, was shocking. And there's one that appeared on the Jerry Springer show I used to see almost every day. His name was Tweaky Dave. Now, Tweaky Dave, when I got there, he would be on the street, and he was a strange-looking guy, and he had come from probably some kind of terrible home existence, and his terrible home existence had created him. And he was on the street. When I first saw him, he had a mohawk with those punk rock, with spike, coming out, the spikes, like 10-inch spikes coming out of his head. And, he'd be filthy. These people, these kids that would run away from home, they would end up having to do whatever they could to survive. And guys like Tweaky Dave would probably fall prey to, having to be prostitutes to survive. And you would see them, and you would see them in different states every day of destitute, depraved, drug-addled. You would see them, the horror of it all, the horror, seeing them filthy, seeing them, fighting over whatever they were fighting over, probably drugs. You would see them, huddled together. Sometimes, when they were tired, you would see them, huddled together, and one of them nodding off, and the others, watching out for them. I would see certain homeless people that you would see each day, and they would be in rags. I mean, to the point where a lot of times there wouldn't even be any seat in their pants. They'd be walking down the street completely exposed because their jeans are completely shredded, and it'd just be hanging off their legs. I can remember one time, this one African-American gentleman that was homeless and, always just in a really bad frame of mind, talking to himself, and I can remember one day seeing a white man driving a wood-paneled station wagon, and it was a, middle-aged man, but he had the Coke bottle glasses, and he looked like a Dahmer type. He looked like a larger Jeffrey Dahmer, and he's driving, and this African-American man is in the passenger seat, and all of a sudden the door opens to the station wagon, and that homeless man gets out of that car completely naked, and he's screaming and running for his life.